Hello, everybody. Welcome. My name is Meredith Gershenson. I'm a research analyst here at workforce.com. And today we're going to talk a little bit about why HR is key to your company's financial success. I am joined by a very special guest, Linda Schiaffino. Linda, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for asking me to join.
Of course. Linda is the CEO of Coach Business Solutions. She has successfully and seamlessly converted a thriving corporate career as an accomplished accounting and HR expert, the perfect combination for this topic exactly. Mm-hmm. Coach Business Solutions is a viral fractional CFO, controller, and HR consultancy. Linda has also mastered the crucial marriage of accounting and financial and human resource world, coaching and mentoring business leaders on the issues that they are most concerned about. So Linda is truly the perfect guest for this exact topic that we have here. So guys, I am so excited to have her on and to hear exactly what she has to say about this. To give everyone a quick platform walkthrough for those who are new, who haven't joined us in the past, on the right, we have our chat box. Feel free to throw in any questions that you have throughout the webinar. We're going to do a last 10, 15-minute Q&A. I always say 15 minutes. It always feels like it's probably closer to 10. We always have so much to talk about here with our guests. So feel free to throw in any questions you have in that chat box. I will be sure to tag them, and we'll get around to it at the very end of the Q&A. To get everyone acquainted, I like to come up with a little prompt, a little icebreaker, so to speak. It used to be really mundane. I would, talk about the weather, but I'm trying to get more creative with these prompts. So in our last newsletter that we sent out last month, I talked a lot about podcasts, books, recommendations, TV shows, that sort of thing. So my question for you guys this morning is, do you prefer books or podcasts? I am personally a big podcast fan. Let me see if I can even type this out. Podcast. And also, if you have a preference, I would love to hear your suggestions. So personally, I love Armchair Expert. Guys, throw it in the chat box. I would love to hear your preference, books or podcast. Fran, podcast. Laura, hi, it's so nice to see you. Laura says podcast, but books is also a close second. Cindy, podcast. I love it. Guys, throw out any suggestions. Nicholas, books. I feel that. I need to get back on the book grind. Okay, perfect. Guys, I'm loving this. Feel free to throw in any suggestions on either of those, entertainment channels, I guess you would call it. Okay, moving on. We have a couple poll questions throughout the webinar as well. Really good way to interact with all of you all. So feel free to interact, and just those will pop up on the bottom left of your screen. We also have a handout at the very end. I will be passing that out. It is a really great article from Workforce. Actually, I used it in a lot of the research for this webinar. It's some formulas for HR effect on business result. It really dives into these formulas that offer those quantitative metrics that HR should be using for sure. Audiobooks, Larissa, I love it. That is actually a great suggestion. I'm going to have to get back in the audiobooks. And then for those who are watching live, you are going to be given those SHRM and HRCI PDC credits. So if you're a member of either of SHRM or HRCI, I will share those at the very, very end of the webinar. If you have any questions, you can email me at meredith@workforce.com. I'm happy to point you in the right direction. Finally, to give a little background on workforce.com, we are HCM software that specializes for businesses with hourly staff. And really, we run these webinars to present our own learnings and data from our own clients. So without further ado, all right, let's get things kicked off. Linda, I would love for you to tell me about, Coach Business Solutions and just some of the work that you do with hourly wage industries.
Sure. Coach Business Solutions is launched as a fractional CFO, CHRO. Mm-hmm. And our primary focus is supporting, coaching, and mentoring small businesses that are looking for some help in making sure their strategy is aligned with their profitability goals, to make sure they're compliant on every aspect, primarily human resources, and to just make sure that their growth is in line with what their hopes are. My goal is always with these businesses to have them say to me at any point in our relationship, I feel so much better. I'm sleeping now. So that's kind of our mission statement, is to hear those business owners saying they're sleeping now. They're not worrying about the things that they shouldn't worry about. And that's where I step in.
Absolutely.
Some of my time. Sorry.
Yeah, no, please go ahead.
Some of my time has been split, obviously, on the HR part of things on both salary and hourly employees. And the focus of the industries that I've served in the hourly space have been kitchen staff, museum staff, installers, integrators, and anyone that is really out in the field in a manufacturing or an integration space. So that gives me, some perspective on what some of you might be facing.
Nice. And, we were talking earlier, we were catching up even a few days ago talking about this topic and how it's really hard to find that intersection between HR and that financial quantitative metrics that typically CFOs have, CEOs, COOs, and even then mid-managers, right? Having operations, general managers, having all these metrics, and HR is kind of left to their own devices in a lot of ways, I feel like. So my question for you is, do you find that HR typically has a seat at the table when it comes to a company's finances?
It's a good question. I would say no. I would say that it's kind of a second thought for a lot of companies that are growing. Obviously, your major corporations, they have leaders in the department of every layer. But in the smaller space, you're going to have some challenges where someone is wearing, too many hats. And honestly, that was how my career grew, was wearing too many hats, both doing the accounting. I'm a degreed accountant, as well as, you should do some HR. And then you really have to learn what your place is, learn what your expertise is, and then find a way to express that to leadership, finding some kind of a soft mentor at the top.
Yeah. To give a quick synopsis, so to speak, on this entire topic, how does HR come into play when we're talking about ROI? And, are there any ways that actually might surprise people?
I think the surprise is in that there is and should be analyzed what the ROI is of human resources. And there are any number of metrics and ratios that you could throw around. But one thing that I think is important for HR professionals to understand when they're talking to the financial experts and the leaders is to speak their language. And that might be the most surprising thing.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that's where, there's a lot of transferable skills, of course, when you're talking mid-management and up, where a lot of managers seem to be kind of speaking the same language. And again, HR feels like they're on this outskirts. And this is just conversations that I've had, with HR professionals and clients that we work with, and feeling like I can't transfer what I know about the engagement surveys that we're sending out into metrics that actually matter to our CFO and CEO, and even, again, COO. It is so hard to match that language and to actually get over that barrier, so to speak. Yeah, absolutely.
And also to feel that you have, a partner in the CFO.
Yes, that is so key. And, hopefully we'll be able to get to some actionable and, just solutions at the end of this webinar to actually match the language of these C-suite professionals who are obviously wanting the development of the business as a whole, but it's hard to get there if everyone's not speaking the same language.
True.
Absolutely. I want to first kind of touch on keeping overtime at a minimum. This is something that is a very hidden pathway to success when we're talking ROI in HR. So my question for you, Linda, is what are some of the primary reasons that lead to executive overtime in organizations, and how can HR quickly detect these issues?
So I would say probably the first offender there is obviously unplanned PTOs, vacations, absences that employees haven't either foreseen or requested approval for. And then the management of the remaining staff. How can they circle back? How can they backfill for that person's missed responsibilities? How long will that person be out? And understanding that time is of the essence. Communication is of the essence. So knowing this as far in advance as you can gives you the opportunity to really hedge your bets and make sure you're perfectly poised.
Absolutely. I want to point to this very first slide that actually elaborates on some of the points you just made, talking about 8 ways to reduce overtime hours. And I think these top 8 ways are really, reflected especially within the hourly wage industries. Linda, I'm curious, is this something that you're seeing in some of the industries that you've worked with?
Yes, definitely. It's
Mhm.
widespread because managers are spread thin, and HR departments are spread thin as well. So it's hard to have the advantage of seeing this coming and being able to, address it with the least amount of impact.
We actually have a client called Amenity Collective. They're an awesome organization. They do mostly within the hospitality realm. And we were talking to Adam Chen, and he is thinking of his exact title. I think he is the COO, I believe, of Amenity Collective. And he was talking a lot about the issue on, seasonality, and there's a huge amount of growth within their organization. They do a lot of lifeguarding at certain pools. And they have over, I think, 10,000 employees in a given month, and it fluctuates over time. So that's something that's really hard to keep track of. And we're talking about taking the workload off the manager's plates and making sure that it's something that they don't need to constantly deal with. So that huge growth actually created such a divide with tracking, overtime alerts and making sure PTO was all accounted for. So when it actually tied in with their, time and attendance system with workforce.com's time and attendance system, they're actually able to cut overtime completely in half almost immediately. So that's something that, again, we're talking really small changes that can make such a big impact and actually, what's the word I'm looking for? Actually supply HR with that quantitative data and saying, we were actually able to cut overtime hours in half, and they were able to show that very quickly. So again, taking the workload off the manager's plates, I think, is absolutely huge. I want to hear about some elaboration on the connection between HR's role in managing overtime and actually improving employee satisfaction and productivity. I think these 2 points specifically are something where that intersection between the financial side and HR kind of comes into play. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
Well, absolutely, they do come into play. And I think that that could be a failure on some financial leaders to understand the importance of employee engagement and retention.
Absolutely.
It's not hard to calculate the cost of turnover, of involuntary turnover, and obviously voluntary turnover, but it's not hard to calculate that. And I think that that's the trick, is to, again, try to have that partner in the accounting realm, or to enhance your own skills in terms of analytics. Any spreadsheet program can help you enter information and understand, all right, my time is $80 an hour, his time is $20 an hour, times whatever. When you start speaking in numbers, you're going to get the attention of the financial people, and that's the hook.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point. And to even zoom out more on that topic, how does employee satisfaction and productivity actually feed into the ROI of a company?
Well, I think with taking the opposite approach, employee dissatisfaction, right? So you know what the cost of turnover is, but then there's absenteeism. Morale is an intangible. You can only do so many surveys to find out how people are feeling about the company, if they're even honest. And that's a tough one to assign any metric to, or a KPI. But you can develop KPIs to determine if you're trending positively or if you have some hotspots that need to be addressed. If employees are feeling pressured to put in overtime, it's not something they want to do for financial reasons or can do for family reasons, they're going to start that whole process of disengagement, where they're looking at another opportunity. And that will feed into your turnover. That is just not, that doesn't ever have a positive impact on ROI, unless, of course, it's, a forced layoff type of a situation.
Sure, for sure. And I love that perspective of coming at it from opposed to engaging your employees to disengaging. You don't want to get to that point, obviously. It's kind of like, I don't know if you guys remember, back in high school where you were actually given grades, in college, whatever it is. And it was a lot easier to actually fall to that from A to B to C's. It was so much easier because you already started at that top A point, technically, when you started the class. So it's a lot easier to disengage than it actually is to re-engage, if that makes sense. So I think that's such a good perspective, Linda. Thank you for sharing that. How can HR leverage data and analytics to monitor and detect overtime trends and patterns that actually might be hidden in the numbers?
Hidden in the numbers. So I think, from an accounting standpoint, if I'm in good partnership with my HR team, which I should be, I'm helping them understand the outside costs that maybe they're not capturing in, let's say, employee A's overall burden. They make $20 an hour and our taxes are, $10 an hour. So they cost us $30 an hour. Right. Well, on top of that is, taking the statutory information out of that. What are the costs of your benefits? What's the cost of additional training, mentoring, and coaching to have them perform at their best in their current role or potentially be considered for promotion? And again, the partnership is crucial. I do know and I do understand that the partnership is all too rare, and the challenge is in getting that partnership, and it takes a while because it's a relationship that needs to be built, and we know that relationships are built in trust. So that's the trick there. I'm finding that almost every robust HRIS, HRMS program that I'm seeing is really taking a lot of this information to heart and incorporating it into their programs so that the tools are already there. And the important tools that these things capture are the actual data, the time, the dollars, and the additional costs. So it can kind of shortcut the need for an HR leader, HR professional to have to understand what they're looking at in order to interpret it on a level that makes sense, that they have control over the information, but also that speaks to that finance leader so they understand what they're hearing and how it's important for them to hear it.
That's such a good point. Do you have any suggestions just off the top of your head on ways to improve that relationship between HR and finance?
I think it's tricky, and a lot of it is based on the actual role that each one of us is playing in the organization.
Yeah.
Their reporting up structure. Typically I have seen and prefer that the HR department has at least a dotted line to me, if not a dotted line to the CEO. And in my approach, it's always been for anybody that reports to me to make sure that they have everything they need, tools and support to succeed at their job. Because frankly, the better they are at their job, the easier my job is.
Yeah.
So I think that might be one approach an HR professional can take, take them out to lunch, take them out, for coffee, and just say, I'm really looking, here it is the fourth quarter, at least for those on a calendar year. I'm really looking into how I can best support the organization in the new coming year based on the financial and economic challenges that we're seeing. What can I do to support and make your job easier so that, when you're reporting financials, you have all the tools that you need. And then just continue that conversation, understanding they're heading into a busy season now, so they might be a little bit less available.
Sure. But I love that you mentioned that. Even, we talked earlier about, does HR have a seat at the table? And from what I'm hearing, and feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like there's something to be said about pulling that seat out for yourself and taking a seat. Offering up that help to those in payroll, to the financial aspect of the company, and going to managers, going to operations and saying, what can I do? What information can I provide? And maybe even kind of compiling a short amount of metrics that you've actually gathered that you believe really helps, such as overtime hours, such as employee feedback surveys, anything of the sort, and say, hey, here's information, qualitative and quantitative, that I actually can offer, and kind of putting that under their nose. And again, pulling that seat out for yourself and taking a seat at the table, I think is something that is really overlooked at the end of the day. And I think that's exactly, where HR can actually really insert themselves, kind of put their foot in the door, so to speak.
Mm-hmm. Don't let them, forget about you, because when they need you, they don't forget about you.
Exactly. And it's so true. I think, again, just based off the HR personas and, professionals that I've actually talked to, it is so hard to feel like a really, truly viable source of information that your C-suite is going to come to and say, hey, you're on the front lines here. What can you tell me? And oftentimes they're overlooked, and it is such a shame. And I think making sure that you're known in that sense and saying, hey, this is actually information that I have in my back pocket due to an HRIS system like Workforce or whatever it might be, whatever, way you have of tracking overtime and employee feedback and all those things that actually contribute to the ROI that we might not see, and offering that up to the table. I think that's so true.
And an additional cost to consider is the cost of the HRIS system.
Yes.
Because some of them are asking themselves, we're paying $15,000 a year for this service or whatever the cost may be. Yeah. And they want to know, they're doing ratios in our heads all the time. If I have $60,000 a year divided by X number of employees, okay, just that alone is an additional cost that is important for you to understand. Because again, anytime you're talking about costs to them, anytime you're talking about ROI, they're listening to you. And then they're also, hopefully, any of the doubts that they have about you being someone who should be at the table are diminished because you're taking that emotional intelligence to at least understand what the person on the other side of the table needs to hear and how they need to hear it. So again, it's tough because they're kind of conflicting, and accounting and HR they're not really, cohesive, concurrent, functions in terms of how our brains work. But you don't need to be an accountant to be able to speak their language. It's just learning what to say, how to say it, and then having the numbers to back it up.
Absolutely. And, I think there is something to be said, especially with some HR systems that are out there. And, Workforce generally prides itself on a big number that I see everywhere touted around, the 455% increase in ROI that Workforce offers. It is absolutely our pride and joy, that number, right? So there are for sure some systems out there that actually diminish that ROI because you're paying for way too much. You're overpaying realistically. So I completely agree there. I want to continue on to some, industry specific examples within overtime. So in industries where overtime is actually very, very common, we're talking healthcare, we're talking manufacturing. Laura, I know you can speak to that in the audience. What specific challenges should HR professionals be prepared to address in minimizing overtime costs?
It's tricky because I think it might be less tricky in the manufacturing and in the more of the corporate structure as opposed to the healthcare. And I think, and I don't mean to minimize this, but I think because you have sales forecasts, you either have projects, you have pipelines, and there's some way that you can analyze those pipelines against the needs of the organization to properly staff.
Yep.
And there are always going to be those outliers, those variables, but doing the best you can to at least align the necessary staff with whatever projects are coming in, you can minimize, the negative impact on that. Healthcare is tricky because health is tricky. So you're going to have, certain areas. My son is a cardiac rehab specialist, and this is a program where people have to enter it after they've had heart surgery. So there's a structure there. There shouldn't be emergencies. But in the rehab and in any of those medical scenarios, something's going to happen that you weren't expecting. And so that somebody may, it's either an employee has, an issue where they can't be there, or there's an influx of emergency situations that come in. So it pretty much it has to double your production. How do you address that? Is it temporary? Is it a failure of something previous to that function? Can we analyze how they're doing things in order to make sure that we're able to serve properly? I think an important visual for people is to really see workflows in general outside of HR, accounting, all workflows as a baton relay. And if everyone before you and after you receives or gives that baton in the right method, you're winning the race because you're prepared. You're being given what you need to succeed, and then conversely, you're sending it back out. So it usually goes back to that cohesive communications. We're struggling because we were understaffed. We didn't properly plan it prior to all of this influx of work. How do we address that? What is the financial impact to that? And then how do we make sure that always going back to employee engagement and satisfaction, that we're taking care of them and paying attention to them.
I love the conversation that we're having around the regularity of these issues occurring. I think that's really important to pinpoint, hey, is this something that we're coming across a lot? Are we constantly understaffed? Are we constantly overstaffed? Are employees really reporting that they're not happy and for whatever reason, A, B, or C? I think that is really important in talking about it from such a kind of a broader standpoint and saying, okay, where are their issues? Where are their patterns being laid out for us? And how can we actually overcome it? I quickly wanted to point to this poll question I sent out a couple minutes ago. I asked, what do you think is the biggest challenge in minimizing overtime in your organization? 32% said lack of effective scheduling, 27% said poor time tracking and reporting, 14% said communication gaps between HR and departments, and others are saying insufficient workforce forecasting. I think those are all very viable. And actually, this one on communication gaps, I think is really important. It feeds me beautifully into my next question on how can HR departments collaborate effectively with department managers to ensure that overtime is actually kept at a minimum while also maintaining that operational efficiency?
It's a good question, a very good question. And I think, again, it is always about communication. And it's about the first part that I think is most important about communication after you ask that question, that discovery, is then listening. And too many times we've seen managers promoted that maybe need a little help in being now a manager of that department. Yes. Very few managers are coming out of a business management program with a business manager degree, MBA, with the experience on how to actually be a manager. And in my opinion, it always comes back to emotional intelligence, because if you're not listening, you're not learning. And in the learning is how you can serve. So if you have departments that maybe weren't really working cohesively, kind of working in these silos, you have to have a high level view of what are the dynamics there, and is it manager based? Is it poor staffing? And then trying to step into that. And again, I know what I'm saying. I don't have time for that. I'm managing payroll. I'm looking at time, that type of
juggling everything. Yep.
Well, and that's why I will say that HR is definitely not for the faint of heart. We're a pretty strong breed. We have to be, and just from a day to day, we don't know what we're going to see. So I think that it is 100% about communication, but it's about listening after you ask that question. Again, treat them like a small business owner. What are your pain points? What keeps you up at night? And I have one example of a company that I worked for, and coming in with a strong HR experience, there are a lot of people there that have been there 20, 30 years. So they came to me and they said, some of them came to me and they said, I don't know what it means to be a manager at this company. So I was impressed with their own self-awareness that they had, a need to learn more. I was grateful for the opportunity to hopefully help them learn more and have them be a happier employee. But when I posed the question to ownership, they didn't know. They had no idea. One of them, it was a family business. One of them said, I just want them to think. Yeah. And, I said to him, I know what you mean by that. But if I tell employee A that you just want him to think, his head will explode, because he's an engineer. He's a highly educated person. He's always thinking, what does that now mean? So again, it comes down to, I want them to either, have these responsibilities and authorities, and then I want to step away and let them have that, but be there just in case they need a little bit of guidance.
I love that. And Laura said it best, so did Melanie. Communication is key. Communication is truly everything. And I'm curious, a question for the audience, actually. What does your communication look like between your department managers or, heads of departments? I'm curious what you guys have in place within your organization. Feel free to send that in the chat. I would love to get some ideas rolling. Terry in the chat said, overtime by employees who have poor time management. That is something that we hear, especially on our side at workforce.com side, of hearing that managers and, frontline employees don't necessarily have the, they're juggling so much. They don't really have the bandwidth for, oh, shoot, I'm overtime. And this is where, technology, I think, really comes into play. Things like overtime alerts, getting that on their phone saying, hey, you're about to hit overtime. You need to clock out or whatever it might be, or you need to submit overtime to have it approved by your manager. That's been actually huge. And speaking of Amenity Collective, our client, they've actually really gotten some great use out of this. And again, it's really has what's contributed to their overtime being cut in half. And that is a huge, huge win for their baseline. I think that's such a good point. I want to go into time tracking and administrative burdens here. So can you explain to me why accurate time tracking is actually essential for a company's financial success and how, at the end of the day, it actually ties into HR's role?
So I think to the point of that was just mentioned in the chat as well, if you have, let's say pre-approved overtime, obviously there's an impact to the bottom line, but in addressing the compliance issues with your policies, you want to be clear in those policies, what the responsibilities are for the employees and the management in terms of time tracking. Yeah. Again, a robust HRIS, really makes that much of the job a lot easier. So again, talk about an ROI on the cost of that program, can easily say it takes me as an HR professional 10 hours a month just to do this function that is provided inherently in the program that we're paying for. So, there's that running tab of all of the things that you're saving money by having this really strong HRIS system. Accurate time tracking, most importantly, Department of Labor is very strict in terms of employees being paid properly, whether it's their classification, their rate. There are now discussions are being raised on increasing the overtime rate to a less than gross below poverty line level that it currently is. And so from a standpoint of the compliance need for HR, the time tracking is crucial on the off chance you have a Department of Labor audit coming in. Somebody comes in, they want to know. Yeah. By providing those records, it tends to make things go a lot easier on that opportunity. So it's worth its weight in gold and in many ways for most departments.
Absolutely. And we'll definitely be diving into the compliance side of things later on. And it is something that cannot be brushed over. As much as sometimes we want to brush over it, it can't. It sucks. It's the worst. But you know what? It's a necessary evil for sure of HR. I want to quickly throw back to the chat. Larissa said, when we're talking about communication between departments, Larissa said each department head meets with the CEO or CFO weekly. In turn, the HRM has a weekly information exchange with both the CEO and CFO to close that circle of information here. I think that is awesome. That's curious ideal. What your thoughts are on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's ideal from a lot of levels. Obviously, it's smart business for the CEO and the CFO to make sure that the head people person is heard, but also feels heard. They go back to everyone else that they represent and will, continue that story. Listen, I've got the ear of the C-suite. They're hearing what we have to say. There's an intangible and almost unmeasurable way of just understanding how that impacts positively the entire rank and file. So just a simple 1 hour or whatever a week, their investment, their ROI of their time has a massive impact. And that's ideal, is that's happening. Then the HR leader doesn't feel like they have to fight or pull out their own chair to get a seat at the table.
Yep.
And they're given the tools and support to be the best that they can be.
I love that. Yeah, you don't need to fight tooth and nail to pull your chair out. Yeah, that's absolutely huge. Melanie, I feel your pain. Melanie said, we have a small business. The employees come straight to me with questions and concerns. This is something that we hear a lot, especially on our end with, businesses around 10 employees or so, where they just go straight to the HR manager. They're like, this is what you're here for, right? You have nothing else. Like, here, let me just come at you with all my issues. Linda, is this something that you've heard kind of on your end of things with the consulting side with smaller businesses?
My entire career.
Yeah, fair enough.
And,
fair enough.
I think it's a credit to you that they feel that they have an ally and they have somebody they can go to, because a lot of people will say they don't. A lot of people will say, mostly incorrectly, that HR doesn't represent me. It only represents the company, and I'm, left out in the lurch. And I think that's a big compliment to you that they are coming to you. I know it's not good for your time management, but it is a big compliment. So congratulations.
Yeah, that's very true. It's telling of the type of manager that you are, Melanie. Absolutely. Larissa, I think that's such a good point. She said it works both ways. Not only should they hear HR, but HR should know what is going on, as their decisions may be affected by HR tools that they don't know. It's a two-way street at the end of the day, of course. And it is such a balance. And, we're talking about having a seat at the table, pulling out your chair on your own, being offered a chair maybe. I think it is so, so important that everyone realizes that this is something that it's a balancing act. Some days you might be pulling out your chair, so to speak. Some days they might be, dusting your chair off, hoping that you would take a seat.
We're all going to see chairs a lot differently today.
Yeah, same. The theme is chairs today, everybody. Absolutely. I want to quickly point to this next slide. It's from, a couple quotes from this really great article. We're talking about the financial argument for time tracking here. For those who are just listening in on their phones, I'll read this out loud. The first quote saying, time tracking helps to reduce financial waste. Without standardized time tracking, companies could be losing track of billable hours and employees could miss out on wages. Both businesses and their employees could be losing out on hard-earned money because of their lack of proper tracking. The second quote says, time tracking can significantly reduce the length of the billing cycle. If it takes 30, 60, or even 90 days just to bill clients, much less receive payment, the right tracking software could revolutionize the billing cycle and ensure improved cash flow. This, in turn, allows companies to pay employees on time and line up additional resources as needed. What I loved about these quotes is calling it reduced, financial waste. I think that is such a good, line of words to say when we're talking about the financial argument of time tracking. And it's all about kind of getting specific. We're talking overtime, we're talking all that good stuff. It is getting very niche into the problem. And over time, that really adds up, that compiles a lot. Linda, I'm curious on your thoughts on these quotes, if any.
I think, another way to think of it in terms of, bridging that gap between HR and finance is invariably almost every conversation between a CEO and a CFO, if there are varying either verticals or there are even varying departments within a company, is how's that department doing? Are they profitable? If you're able in your time, and you should be able to, in your time tracking software, assign classes, assign codes in coordination with the CFO to say, listen, I think you might want to be looking at this department's time, tracking their time. And who's working on what? How long is it taking them to do it? The system should be able to just assign those codes. I'm pretty sure most of them do, where you just know that employee A has worked on X project for this week, B project for the next. And then how you're backing that up is, what general ledger codes does that project align with the accounting software, so that in real time, this CFO has information. It looks like this department is trending positively. Maybe we want to bonus them, or maybe we want to do, something special to entice them, incentivize them. So the right software can provide, a lot of detail that you may not be thinking of without some input from the CFO to see how can you make their lives easier by reducing the amount of questions they have to ask for profitability.
Absolutely. We recently have a couple of clients that are attaching the time and attendance plan from Workforce on with their payroll plan that Workforce provides. And having that connection, having those systems actually interacting with each other has been absolutely monumental in terms of, the financial argument of tracking time and making sure the ROI is actually being met up to standard of, what the CEO or COO expects it to be. So again, having those communications, having those systems match up and align, it's been huge. Absolutely. I'm curious what you think on some common challenges that employees and managers face, when it comes to time tracking and managing work hours.
I'd probably say a big one would be their own time to do that, because more likely they're working managers. So they're not just sitting there managing people, they actually have a function. And so there's usually that time, deadline, right? Yeah. Payroll has to be in by, 5 o'clock Wednesday, which means hours need to be approved by 5 o'clock Friday,
Mhm.
the reminders of that, the glitches in the time cards, approvals, and that kind of a thing. So kind of streamlining that information for them so that, again, what could take, 2 or 3 hours is really maybe just a half an hour for them.
Yeah.
That minimizes their time spent on something that is considered a no value added in the Sarbanes-Oxley world, which means there's no revenue generated with that function,
Right.
although it's important. So finding ways to minimize the time that they have to spend on things that they don't really consider their job.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's again, managers were trying to take the workload off their plate. I think that's absolutely important. I actually sent out a poll question, slowly being filled out, but I asked, what aspect of time tracking do you believe poses the greatest challenge to your organization? It seems like the majority so far are saying ensuring accuracy without manual errors. That's absolutely huge. Others are saying streamlining the time tracking process for managers. Again, taking that workload off their plate. Absolutely underrated. Some people are even saying ensuring compliance with labor laws and regulations, of course, balancing privacy concerns with accurate tracking. I think that's very, very well reflected. Now, some people are saying reducing administrative tasks for employees. Absolutely. And it seems like the accuracy without manual errors is really taking the cake on this one. Linda, what are your thoughts? Is that something that you're seeing reflected in clients that you work with?
I do see it. And
Yeah.
I think that if you're seeing a trend, let's say if it's one department, you've got to spend some time with them. You've got to buy them lunch. You've got to sit them down with a demo of the software and say, it seems like some of us, are missing some of these things. This is how you can get your time done. When you get this done accurately, quickly, your manager only needs to spend X number of minutes doing it. And then typically, you have the manager saying, oh, yeah, thank you, that type of a thing. And then just going over it. At that point, usually you can kind of hone in on who the quote unquote offenders are and then spend some time with those people. But again, it's time and communication and training.
Yeah. We actually, over at one of our clients, My Health Medical Center, they are, of course, healthcare industry specific. Natasha, who is a system development manager there, would spend hours on end exporting timesheets, making sure everyone's accounted for. They have, I'm talking almost 1,000 staff, and it fluctuates during, some parts of the year, but around 800 to 1,000 staff, if not more sometimes. And to have the automation of the timesheets being exported, no need for manual errors anywhere, that was huge. And she was even saying, she was like, this is something where if I were to pay somebody to do this, it would be $100 a week of payment, just having this one kind of boring task already automated. It's huge. And it was a huge workload taken off of her plate. Absolutely.
That's another way you really reinforce the value of that software, of that payroll program.
Absolutely. Yeah. If we're talking ROI, yeah, look no further. Truly. How can HR balance the need for accurate time tracking with employees' privacy and data security concerns?
I think, again, you want to make sure that your HRIS system provides that security.
Sure.
Is explaining to you how the file server structure is secure access. Everyone that I've seen has been bulletproof in terms of sometimes I have to, break open, ribs to get them to allow another person to see any of the information. So
Absolutely.
I've not seen anything that is electronic or automated have any security issues. Of course, hacking could happen, but it could happen. And there's just a difficult way. It's just difficult to do that. The challenge has been in what may be called the old-fashioned way, paper records, actual file cabinets, and even file servers on the employer's database. So those are areas where the IT department has to be brought in to understand that this is super crucial.
Yeah.
It's an iron gate there. So, it goes down to communication and also just expressing the importance of, you wouldn't want your information shared accidentally. So let's make sure everyone's is protected.
Yeah, guys, chairs and communication, the theme of today's webinar. Absolutely. It feeds me perfectly into another C word, compliance. And I want to point quickly to this slide that we have here, the cost of non-compliance. We're all talking about the financial argument of things, the cost of non-compliance in this case. Linda, my question for you is, what are the potential legal consequences or risks that companies face when payroll is not handled accurately and or compliantly?
I think it won't come as a surprise to anybody in this room that they're huge. And we were talking, to the point where, if you're not depositing your tax deposits, you can be arrested. There's a zero tolerance for that type of a thing. So anywhere from, it happens. Accidents happen. Employees will put in the wrong time and then come back to you once they see their pay stub and they say, you didn't pay me the right amount. And then your policy has to dictate, according to all the regulatory thoughts in place for both federal and state, to make sure that you're clear. If we miss something through our error, we will, you have to run a special payroll. Or if your state allows, that we will pick it up on the next pay cycle. But again, that's where compliance is absolutely crucial and could be devastating to a company. If you're not compliant, especially those companies that, and it's increasing, have multi-state employees. Where the employee lives is a state that you need to be registered in as an employer. If it's one employee, I have a client, one employee in each of about 7 or 8 states. They're registered in all of those states. Any number of those states, taking California out of any conversation, any number of those states, Massachusetts, for example, has 8 different withholdings that we have to register for. And it's for one employee. And that is an additional burden on the HR staff there. But in the right hands with this payroll service that they're using, they're acting as TPA. They're taking care of all of the filings and making sure that the company is in compliance. But you want to have that second set of eyes that is constantly on the pulse of what's happening, what's changing, and how to address it. I don't know if you have any California employers on the call, but some of you may be aware that their sick time policy is changing effective January 1, and it's doubling because California. But how do you find that out? Well, hopefully you hear about it from your payroll, your HRIS system, but also whatever sources that you're constantly engaged in to make sure that you're compliant. It's very tricky. I liken it to nailing Jell-O to the wall. It is almost impossible to master. And all you can do to keep yourself from going crazy is to just make sure you have trusted and reliable sources.
Absolutely. And this has actually been a tip that I have talked about in a past webinar talking about compliance. Another really good option is actually subscribing to the U.S. Labor Department or the U.S. Bureau of Labor and talking about, making sure that you're subscribed to the right wage and hour law changes. And I get a lot of articles and press releases saying Starbucks just settled up $100 million of lawsuits for overtime hour non-compliance protocols. Same with Chipotle. And there's so many articles like that. So it's really important to stay on top of it. And again, like any HRIS system, like Workforce, it is so important that this is automatically, applied to your time tracking, your time and attendance sheets, that sort of thing. So that's exactly what we do here. My question for you, Linda, is how can HR actually ensure that managers have the knowledge and the resources, talking about this, that they need to run payroll accurately while also staying compliant with labor laws and regulations? It's a lot to keep track of.
Yeah, and I think I would be cautious about trying to train managers on labor law and compliance. Typically, my response has been, if they're finding something tricky, is just don't say anything. Don't say anything. Let me try to handle it, on your behalf. I'm happy to give you the information to share with them. Don't say anything other than what I give you, because people will hear what they want. And as long as there's a consistent story that is compliant, at least you know that you've done the right thing and you've stayed compliant.
Absolutely.
And it's a challenge for managers because they have enough to worry about.
Yeah. And it's so hard already to keep track of so many of the changes, let alone, state by state. That is something that is a whole nother beast. We can do a whole nother webinar on this one section of the webinar. We can do a whole nother webinar. I swear to God. What role should HR play in auditing payroll processes periodically to ensure accuracy and compliance?
Depends on if you have, if you're processing payroll, it's your responsibility. You've got to look at it. I think that, analyzing trends, if you see, a glitch, like all of a sudden one department's overtime doubled or their hours went down, you want to keep your, fingers on the pulse of that. And, again, having that communication with that manager, what's going on? Do you need any help? And just, listen, we got to keep the hours down in case they're not seeing it. If a manager is approving hours in an HRIS, they see the hours.
Sure.
And typically they know ahead of time, my average is this. Somebody's going to talk to me if it exceeds this average. So then it's just about supporting them and giving them what they need to do the right thing there.
Absolutely. I asked a short response poll question asking, how do you keep your managers in the know on payroll compliance? Some people say email. Others are saying ad hoc, go to HR. It's a skill we are working towards. Love the transparency. Do it for them. Training amongst others. I think, what do you think about doing it for them? Do you think that that's something where, I can say for me personally, I would also be the same, just the kind of worker that I am. I'm like, I'll just do it myself. Like, just, it's fine. Like, let me, no need to put your hands in the pot. Like, I'll just do it. What do you think on that? Do you think that's something that managers should have a lesson learned, even if it's a hard lesson learned, could possibly lead to fines? We're talking compliance here,
Yeah. I think if you have one source, as much pressure as that is on the one source, because it would be us, there's safety there because, again, somebody's not saying something, that they feel is kind or generous that, obligates the company to something now in error. And I think, in terms of certain areas that all of them that are, kind of generally accepted for all, little training. Here's a little bit, about what you can do. It's empowering. But then, you're finishing it with, but I'm here, if anything gets a little tricky or sticky, don't say anything, bring it to me.
Absolutely.
And then it's going to keep that door of yours from having to just be open all the time, getting nothing done during the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we hop into our Q&A section, guys, we're doing pretty good on time. I'm impressed with us. Go team. Okay. Before we hop into that, I would like to close out with my favorite question of the day. What are one or two top tips, actions, or takeaways our audience can leave with to better improve, the reasoning why HR is actually key to the financial success of their company?
Staying current is number one on the whatever labor laws are. Hopefully you're just in one state, so you don't have to worry about too many states. But staying as current as you can. Absolutely. The reliable sources. We all know that we can Google anything, as can our employees, and come up with any number of answers. And typically, whoever pays the most is at the top of your Google search.
Sure.
And they're usually law firms. So there's, they have a vested interest in kind of being vague. It's what they do, but in also being vague so that, you have to engage with them. And there's a need for that. Hopefully not too very often for people. Some actionable steps, sit with the CFO, find out, what's keeping her or him awake at night in terms of the human resources, a part of the company. Audit your HRIS to make sure that they are compliant, making sure that they're the ones who have, for example, the new California sick leave law up to date, because it changes the accrual banks in the payroll system. So making sure that that is accurate on the day that it needs to be accurate, regardless of when you're running your payroll. Have a fourth quarter review before they ask for it as the contract comes up for renewal. Keep track of some pain points that you want them to address, and be a tough negotiator. And then again, you've got to keep current, and we have to find a way to express the importance and the urgency of being compliant to the C-suite, because they would normally be the first ones who would go down in case something bad happened. Definitely. So it's in communication, the language, and always using that approach of trying to be in their seat, be in their chair.
Yep.
And looking back at you and trying to hear what you're saying in a way that really engages them.
Yeah, I think that's so great. And again, just bringing it back to what HR does best and putting that human-centric approach on business admin side of things. That is not always super fun, but so necessary. So necessary. Linda, thank you so much. I want to hop into some of these emailed in questions before we get, close out for the day. If you guys have any questions, I will prioritize those live questions. Throw them in the chat box. I would love to hear from you all. First, we have this question from Willa G. Willa asks, what sort of data should I be presenting to my execs to prove that HR is key for our organization? I love it. Very straightforward.
I think one thing we didn't touch upon, and it might be the elephant in the room, is AI, right? And AI is a very important tool, and it's not new. We've been using it for a very long time. It's just, it might be scarier now because it seems to be everywhere. Yeah. But it is a very important tool in asking those questions that you may not be sure. What is the perspective of a CFO? And then they call them prompts. Let's just say in ChatGPT, it's called a prompt. How can I express the importance of the human resources function to a CFO speaking their financial language? And you actually say those things, and it will start to give you some ideas. How I use AI is only as an outline. I never will use it as full content, because if you don't own the content, people will suss you out right away. And then when the pressing questions come, you're not prepared to answer them. So that is a tool to say, how can I speak to a CFO in ways that they will actually listen to me? Identify reduced costs, identify improved productivity in terms of dollars and values. KPIs and ratios are a financial leader's language.
I love that. Kate Yu asked, as the sole HR administrator in my company, less than 50 employees, I don't get much funding from C-suite. I've tried to explain my perspective from these points, but it often doesn't come across as a pressing matter, quote unquote. What do you think?
I think, pressing matters to the C-suite would be dollars and cents again, safety, compliance issues. Some of you might have a coverage over, or interaction with OSHA level team members, understanding the cost of that. And again, it comes down to the cost. Are you presenting some risk management reductions? Or are you improving, safety programs so that, lost time is reduced? I'll always encourage using visual tools. Spreadsheets, PowerPoints are magic, to our eyes.
Yeah, we love Canva here. This is exactly how our slides are made. So I completely agree with that. Yolanda asked, wouldn't you say a lot of the points covered should be held to operations? I think this is a very important topic. What do you think, Linda?
I don't think anyone should be left out of the conversation.
Yeah.
I think the other side of the table, the chair on the other side of the table.
Yes.
Are they willing to be a partner? Do they want to be a partner? Have they felt that it's something that would make their lives easier or their jobs easier? Again, communication, asking them that. Any structure that is set up in a company is not cast in stone. So if the HR function reports to the operations lead, so be it. Then you know what your angle has to be. But they then are responsible to taking that information and moving it over to something that a CFO or a CEO can understand.
Absolutely. And again, pointing it back to Larissa's comment, it is a two-way street. We're all here to help each other. It isn't just on one person's side or jurisdiction than it is the others. We're all here to support the success of the organization at the end of the day. So very well said, Linda.
True.
Thank you. Linda, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, the hour just flew by. I so appreciate your time. And again, this is such an important topic, and it's really hard to come across someone that has such experience in all aspects and all, the different forums that HR comes in. So thank you so much in coming on and answering all of our questions.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. I want to quickly hand out, again, this really awesome article from Workforce, The Formulas for HR's Effect on Business Results. It does a really good job of laying out, again, those main formulas that you can track on your own manually. If you have any questions regarding, workforce.com or time and attendance system, anything like that, email me at meredith@workforce.com. I'm happy to share that information with you all. Before I do